Hello, good evening, everyone. Better now we will go ahead and we will talk about new Keynesian model and stabilization policy. In particularly, we want to go ahead and we want to understand how what is called as new Keynesian Phillips curve. Okay? And how that new Keynesian Phillips curve is different from adaptive expectation Phillips curve. जो हम पहले पढ़ते आ रहे हैं macroeconomics में adaptive expectation Phillips curve, how that is different from the new Keynesian Phillips curve given by this model. Okay. So let's try to understand this thing. The new Keynesian model is framework for understanding macroeconomic fluctuations that incorporate price stickiness and rational expectation. But these two are the most important assumptions of this model. न्यू केनेशियन मॉडल जो पूरा मॉडल है वो दो चीजों पे बिल्डअप है. द फर्स्ट थिंग इज प्राइस स्टिकीनेस. इट मीन्स दैट प्राइजेस आर स्टिकी इन नेचर. प्राइजेस फ्लेक्सिबल नहीं है. Like the real business cycle said that prices are flexible. But ये मॉडल ने बोला कि prices are sticky in nature and rational expectation. Rational expectation means what? Means people don't make systematic error. लोगों को पता है, उनका information set complete है. People are completely aware about all the information in the economy. It builds upon the Keynesian tradition by adding microeconomic foundation and assuming that prices do not adjust instantaneously to shock, leading to short-term non-neutrality of money. तो ये इसने ये बोला इस मॉडल ने that basically first of all this was a microeconomic foundation model. माने जो हम फिलिप्स कर्व में मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक लेवल पे कर रहे थे या जो हम केन्स ने जो भी थ्योरीज दी वो हम मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक लेवल पे कर रहे थे, वी स्टार्टेड गोइंग अहेड एंड वी स्टार्टेड डूइंग दैट एज एट द माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक लेवल. ठीक है, एट द बेस लेवल फर्स्ट. सेकेंड, वी एज्यूम्ड दैट प्राइजेस डोंट एडजस्ट इंस्टेंटेनियसली टू शॉक. तो जो हमारा रियल बिजनेस साइकिल मॉडल है, इट बेसिकली गोज अहेड एंड सेज दैट प्राइजेस आर क्विक टू एडजस्ट. राइट, जो भी नॉमिनल चीजें हैं दे आर क्विक टू एडजस्ट. राइट, द मार्केट इज ऑलवेज क्लियरिंग. But this model goes ahead and says that prices are sticky in nature, that wages are sticky in nature, leading to short-term non-neutrality of money. So what is neutrality of money, beta? Neutrality of money ये बोलता है that basically we do not change any real factor in the long run. Like, right, long run में no real factor can change. Neutrality of money बोलता है that whenever money will increase, price will increase by same amount, thereby holding any real factor unchanged. Right, real factors will remain unchanged. But now what we are going ahead and what we are saying here is that in the short run, because these prices are sticky, ये price एकदम से नहीं change हो सकते, the prices are sticky in the short run. Therefore, when we will go ahead and when we will change money, prices will not adjust quickly. ये इस theory का one of the biggest assumption है. The model is often used to study stabilization policy, particularly monetary policy. ये मॉडल हम बहुत ज्यादा मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी को पढ़ने के लिए भी यूज करते हैं. Let us now go ahead and talk about the new Keynesian Phillips curve. It represents the relationship between inflation and economic shock. तो ये basically economic slack. So basically it's not shock, sorry, slack. So what this basically goes ahead and does is that it tells you a relationship between inflation and economic slack. It incorporates the effect of expectation and degree of price stickiness in the model. इस मॉडल में हम इस चीज को भी कंसिडर करते हैं दैट प्राइसेस आर स्टिकी इन नेचर, और इस मॉडल में हम रोल ऑफ एक्सपेक्टेशंस को भी वी गो अहेड एंड वी कंसिडर द रोल ऑफ एक्सपेक्टेशन आल्सो. बट देखो, देयर आर टू वेज टू रिप्रेजेंट इक्वेशन ऑफ दिस मॉडल. दिस इज मेथड नंबर 1. ये मेथड नंबर 1 है. ठीक है, in this method number 1 you have to in this equation 1 आपको दो चीजों पे फोकस करना है. The first thing that you have to go ahead and you have to focus on is that inflation depends on future expectations. इन्फ्लेशन डिपेंड्स ऑन फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशन, माने इन्फ्लेशन इस चीज पर डिपेंड करता है कि फ्यूचर में इन्फ्लेशन कितना होगा. इट डिपेंड्स ऑन फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशन. एंड सेकेंडली बेटा, xt, where xt is the difference between actual and full employment output. So xt is called as the output gap. So inflation depends on two things. फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशन अबाउट इन्फ्लेशन, कि फ्यूचर में इन्फ्लेशन कितना होगा, एंड द आउटपुट गैप इन द इकोनॉमी. राइट, द आउटपुट गैप इन द इकोनॉमी, इन दो चीजों पे इन्फ्लेशन डिपेंड करता है. नाउ दिस मॉडल दैट वी हैव रिटन हियर, we can go ahead and we can simplify this model. हम इसी को simplify कर सकते हैं, and this can also be written like this. ठीक है बेटा, in which we are saying again the same thing only, but ये थोड़ा simple तरीके से लिखा गया है, that inflation depends on future expectation of inflation, कि future में inflation कितना होगा, and inflation also depends on the output gap. So here also we are going ahead and saying the same thing, that inflation depends on two things. First, what is the future expectation about inflation? And second, what is the output gap, difference between actual output and the natural level of output. ठीक है बेटा, ऑफ कोर्स ये के है, ये सेंसिटिविटी बता रहा है कि इन्फ्लेशन इससे कितना चेंज होता है. इस के को मैंने इस पूरे की जगह वो के लिख दिया है टू ईज थिंग्स आउट. ठीक है, और ये बीटा है, ये बता रहा है कि इन्फ्लेशन, फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशन ऑफ इन्फ्लेशन से कितना इंपैक्ट होता है. दैट सेंसिटिविटी it is telling here through beta. Okay. So basically we go ahead and we come to an important conclusion that new Keynesian Phillips curve, it suggests that inflation depends on expected future inflation, ki future mein inflation kitni hogi, output gap and the supply shocks. Supply shock is given by this extra ut beta, कि अगर supply change हो जाए तो भी inflation in the economy can change, right? ठीक है. Now what we want to go ahead and do is, beta, we have studied two Phillips curve now. One is called as new Keynesian Phillips curve and the other one is called as the adaptive expectation Phillips curve. So now what we want to do is we want to compare the new Keynesian Phillips curve with the adaptive expectation Phillips curve. Okay. But the adaptive expectation Phillips curve is related to the past expectations. जो हमारा अडेप्टिव एक्सपेक्टेशन फिलिप्स कर्व है वो बेसिकली अडेप्टिव एक्सपेक्टेशन फिलिप्स कर्व इस ईयर के इन्फ्लेशन को प्रीवियस इस ईयर के इन्फ्लेशन को इस ईयर की एक्सपेक्टेशन से कनेक्ट करता है, whereas this year's expectation about inflation is nothing but last year's inflation, है ना. तो हम adaptive expectation Phillips curve में we assume कि people always go ahead and they make systematic error. It is based on adaptive expectations. है ना बेटा, तो हम ये एज्यूम करते हैं कि लोग कंटिन्यूअसली एरर कर ही रहे, क्योंकि इस साल कितना इन्फ्लेशन होगा वो एक्सपेक्टेशन पिछले साल के इन्फ्लेशन के इक्वल है. So it means that this year's expectation about inflation, since it is equal to last year's inflation, people will never completely use the information set. लोग पूरा इंफॉर्मेशन सेट कभी भी यूज नहीं करते हैं और हमेशा पिछले साल की इन्फ्लेशन को फोकस करते रहते हैं, राइट? Whereas in this case, beta, in the case of new Keynesian Phillips curve, the current inflation, it is related to future expectation of inflation. It is forward looking in nature. ये future पे dependent है. Also, the coefficient of the output gap is very very different. तो अगर हम यहाँ के coefficient की बात करें, the coefficient which is related to output gap here, right? And the coefficient that is related to output gap in the second one, it is very, very different beta, right? So the output gap coefficient is also very different. There is long run trade-off between output and inflation. That is, long run Phillips curve is not vertical. ठीक है, इसके बारे में I will just talk in some time. Price stickiness and output fluctuation. तो बेसिकली हमारा जो न्यू केनेशियन फिलिप्स कर्व है, इट एज्यूम्स दैट प्राइसेस आर स्टिकी, दे डू नॉट एडजस्ट इंस्टेंटेनियसली टू चेंज इन डिमांड एंड सप्लाई. वो ये एज्यूम करता है कि प्राइसेस इमीडिएटली चेंज नहीं होते हैं, प्राइसेस आर स्टिकी इन नेचर, उसको एडजस्ट होने में टाइम लगता है. रोल ऑफ मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. Central bank plays a crucial role in stabilizing the economy. Now, according to new Keynesian Phillips curve, monetary policies बहुत important है इकोनॉमी को स्टेबलाइज करने के लिए. क्यों? क्योंकि लोगों का जो इन्फ्लेशन के रिलेटेड जो people are, the inflation that is basically based on the expectation about future inflation. So if you don't bring the right set of monetary policy, अगर आप कुछ अलग ऊटपटांग गलत monetary policy लेकर आते हो जिससे लोगों की फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशंस चेंज हो जाती हैं इन्फ्लेशन के बारे में, सो इट विल इम्पैक्ट द करंट इन्फ्लेशन ऑल्सो, है ना? सो इफ देयर इज चेंज इन द future expectation about inflation because you have not brought the right monetary policy, then your current inflation will also be affected. So basically there is a huge role of the monetary policy. Next beta, demand shock and nominal rigidities. Nominal rigidity such as wage and price stickiness can amplify the effect of demand shock. These rigidities prevent price from adjusting immediately to clear market, which leads to short-term fluctuation in output and employment. तो ये क्या कह रहे हैं? This is saying that price and wage are sticky. Price और wage immediately change नहीं होगा. तो जब डिमांड बढ़ेगी तो डिमांड के बढ़ने पे प्राइस इमीडिएटली नहीं उठ रहा, तो मार्केट क्लियर नहीं कर पाएगी, और जब मार्केट क्लियर नहीं करेगी तो शॉर्ट रन में मार्केट के अंदर फ्लक्चुएशंस आ जाएंगी, राइट? सो टेक दिस एग्जांपल बेटा. सपोज आई टेल यू दैट दिस इज डिमांड सप्लाई एंड दिस इज डिमांड इंक्रीज्ड. नाउ अंडर यूजुअल सिनेरियो क्या होना चाहिए? दैट व्हेन डिमांड इंक्रीजेस प्राइस शुड इंक्रीज. When demand increases, price should increase. But what we are saying here is that price does not increase because price is sticky. So short run mein price has remained unchanged. So because of this, there will be a gap between supply and demand. There will be excess demand in the market. It will cause some kind of issues with output, with employment, with some short-term fluctuation. वही हम यहाँ पे बोल रहे हैं. Now let us look at these graphs. This is one way to show the graph. So let us first go ahead and let us first look at the adaptive expectation Phillips curve graph. ठीक है, तो अगर आपको अडेप्टिव एक्सपेक्टेशन फिलिप्स कर्व इक्वेशन याद हो, सो व्हाट डज दैट इक्वेशन लुक लाइक बेटा? पाई टी is equal to pi t minus 1 plus alpha yt minus ytn. Right? In this case, whenever there would be increase in the output gap, whenever there was increase in output gap, okay, it would cause increase in inflation in the economy. it would cause increase in inflation in the economy. देखो, this is what we are showing. Currently we had a particular output gap, फिर वो output gap increase हुआ. When the output gap will increase, then inflation in the economy also starts increasing, right? So whenever there is going to be increase in the output gap, it is going to go ahead and it is going to cause increase in inflation in the economy. Because this is adaptive expectation, therefore people will always make systematic error, and inflation will never come down even if output level gap subsidizes in long run. तो इवन इफ लॉन्ग रन में, देखो ध्यान से समझो, हाँ, स्लोली बेटा व्हाट विल हैपन, you will have slowly, as output will reach natural level of output, the output gap will fall. तो पहले output gap increase हुआ, but with time output gap will come down as output reaches natural level of unemployment. But inflation will be at a new level because inflation will always be based on past inflation. And because in the past inflation was high, so people will form expectation accordingly. In the past inflation was high, people will form expectation accordingly, and inflation will reach higher level forever. अब उसी का reverse, let's see in the new Keynesian Phillips curve model. In the new Keynesian Phillips curve model, what we have is called as rational expectations. So here people have considered entire information set. In this case, people have considered the entire information set. Because they have considered the entire information set. तो इसका क्या मतलब है बेटा? It means that the moment there will be increase in output level, inflation will increase, of course. But when output level will decrease, then inflation will also decrease. Why? Because people know, they have considered the entire information set. They know that, okay, they can form expectation based on the future. They can anticipate things in advance. तो अगर उनको फ्यूचर में दिख रहा है that the output level is about to decrease, they can predict the future. They are intelligent enough. Huh? So in case of rational expectation theory, therefore, in case of the new Keynesian Phillips curve, ये जो inflation level है, it will also drop. When the output level reaches its original level, inflation will also reach its original level. But that is not something which will happen in the adaptive expectation Phillips curve. In the adaptive expectation Phillips curve, there will be continuous inflationary bias. माने क्या है? Persisted inflationary should lead to inflationary bias as people continuously update their expectation to reflect post inflation. ये हमेशा पास्ट के इन्फ्लेशन में चलते जाएंगे कि पिछले साल ज्यादा थी ना, तो इस साल भी ज्यादा होगी. हर साल ये पिछले साल को देखेंगे, जबकि न्यू केनेशियन फिलिप्स कर्व में हर साल ये अगले साल को पहले ही प्रिडिक्ट कर लेंगे, है ना. तो क्योंकि यहां पर वो हमेशा पिछले साल को देख रहे हैं, दे आर ऑलवेज लुकिंग एट द फ्यूचर, एट द पास्ट, देयरफॉर दे विल कंटिन्यूअसली मेक एन एरर. वो हमेशा सोचते रहेंगे कि इन्फ्लेशन जो है वो बढ़ेगी क्योंकि पास्ट में इन्फ्लेशन ज्यादा थी. जबकि इन केस ऑफ रैशनल एक्सपेक्टेशन, पीपल हैव कंसिडर्ड द एंटायर इंफॉर्मेशन सेट. तो उन्होंने फ्यूचर को पहले ही देख लिया कि फ्यूचर में इन्फ्लेशन गिर सकती है, सो अकॉर्डिंगली दे विल अपडेट देमसेल्व्स. क्योंकि आउटपुट गैप गिर रहा है तो फ्यूचर में इन्फ्लेशन कैन आल्सो फॉल. So they will go ahead and they will consider that fact in advance. That is the difference between these two models. Is this clear? Okay, now let us go ahead and let us try to look at the differences. Beta, I have consolidated the entire differences in a box because this is how it can be asked. आपको इन दोनों के difference पता होने चाहिए. So I have just consolidated the differences together. This is adaptive expectation Phillips curve. This is new Keynesian Phillips curve. देखो ध्यान से. First of all, this is based on past inflation. This is based on rational forward-looking expectation. तो ये बैकवर्ड लुकिंग एक्सपेक्टेशन पे चलता है और ये फॉरवर्ड लुकिंग एक्सपेक्टेशन पे. इन्फ्लेशन इज इनर्शियल स्लो टू एडजस्ट टू चेंजेस टू इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन. क्योंकि ये हमेशा पास्ट में चलता है तो इन्फ्लेशन एक स्पाइरल में चलती है कि पिछले साल ज्यादा थी तो ज्यादा होगी, फिर ज्यादा थी तो ज्यादा होगी. इट गोज इन अ स्पाइरल. इन्फ्लेशन इज फॉरवर्ड लुकिंग एंड डिपेंड्स ऑन फ्यूचर एक्सपेक्टेशन. ये बोलता है कि इन्फ्लेशन फ्यूचर पे डिपेंड करेगी, पास्ट पे नहीं. Role of monetary policy limited since it assumes agents do not anticipate future policy action. यहां पे मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी इतनी इफेक्टिव नहीं होती है क्योंकि लोग जो हैं वो सिस्टमैटिक एरर किए जा रहे हैं. पीपल आर कंटिन्यूसली मेकिंग सिस्टमैटिक एरर. पीपल आर नॉट predicting the policies correctly, hence it is not very effective. Central role in managing inflation through expectation and interest rate. But the role of monetary policy is high in this case. क्यों रोल बहुत ज्यादा है बेटा? Because people will, so whenever you announce something, people will consider that. They are rational human beings. तो वो future को consider करेंगे, है ना? And considering that future, they will go ahead and they will improve their information set. वो अपने information set को improve करेंगे. Right? So monetary policy role is there here. Long run trade-off. Suggest long run trade-off between inflation and unemployment. No long run trade-off. Inflation is driven by expectation and monetary policy. ये बोलता है कि लॉन्ग रन में भी इन्फ्लेशन और अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट के बीच में एक रिलेशन हो सकता है, अडेप्टिव एक्सपेक्टेशन. बट ये बोलता है कि कोई लॉन्ग रन रिलेशनशिप नहीं है. लॉन्ग रन में इन्फ्लेशन सिर्फ एक्सपेक्टेशन और मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी पर डिपेंडेंट है. माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक फाउंडेशन, लैक ऑफ माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक फाउंडेशन. ये कोई भी माइक्रो इकोनॉमिक कॉन्सेप्ट को कंसिडर नहीं करता है. बेस्ड ऑन प्राइस स्टिकीनेस एंड इम्परफेक्ट कॉम्पिटिशन, whereas ये जो मॉडल है it considers the microeconomic aspects like price stickiness, like imperfect competition, etc. ठीक है. Stabilization bias. The tendency of central bank to face difficulty in stabilizing output and inflation, especially when they are trying to simultaneously control inflation and output gap. स्टेबलाइजेशन बायस क्या बोलता है कि सेंट्रल बैंक यूजुअली फेस डिफिकल्टी, उनको एक डिफिकल्टी फेस करनी पड़ती है. क्यों? क्योंकि आउटपुट और इन्फ्लेशन दोनों ही इंपॉर्टेंट कॉन्सेप्ट्स हैं, दोनों ही एक इकोनॉमी के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है और दोनों को साइमल्टेनियसली कंट्रोल करना बहुत ही मुश्किल है. राइट? दिस इज बिकॉज ऑफ फॉरवर्ड लुकिंग नेचर ऑफ एनकेपीसी combined with lack of control over future inflation and inherent trade-off between stabilizing inflation and output. Just for example, beta, suppose central bank says that I want to lower inflation. ठीक है. अब ideally क्या होता है यहाँ पे कि if central bank would have lowered inflation in this model, तो Phillips curve के according, adaptive expectation Phillips curve के according, there would have been inverse relation between inflation and unemployment, right? So when inflation would have lowered, unemployment would have increased. When unemployment would have increased, output would have reduced. So basically this relationship would have existed. But now whenever central bank will announce anything, जब central bank कुछ भी announce करेगा related to inflation, then people are rational. They will take that information in their information set, right? And they will act accordingly. उन्हें पता है कि वो inflation कम होने से कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ रहा, right? They understand that it is not going to affect output in the long run. क्योंकि अगर इन्फ्लेशन कम होगी तो वो सस्ते में भी काम कर सकते हैं. They can work with less wages also, right? So they will demand lower wages. So firms can employ more labor and output can still be more. So basically that relationship breaks because of the forward-looking nature of the new Keynesian Phillips curve, right? And this is what the stabilization bias is all about, right? So let's write this down. मेरे को यहाँ पे 2 points लिखवाने हैं बेटा. Please write it with me. Many central bank have dual mandate to both stabilize inflation and promote full employment. However, due to stabilization bias, they may find it difficult to achieve both simultaneously. Any effort to close output gap could lead to higher inflation and vice versa, creating constant balancing act. Creating constant balancing act. तो बेसिकली स्टेबलाइजेशन बायस क्या बोलता है? स्टेबलाइजेशन बायस इज रिलेटेड टू द टाइम इनकंसिस्टेंसी प्रॉब्लम इन मॉनेटरी पॉलिसी. ठीक है. सेंट्रल बैंक का क्या एम रहता है? यूजुअली सेंट्रल बैंक का एम ये रहता है कि वो इंटरेस्ट रेट किसी तरीके से इकोनॉमी में कम कर दे फॉर सम पीरियड. अगर ये इंटरेस्ट रेट कम हो जाएगा तो पीपल, firms will have more investment. If investment will be more, तो automatically output will increase and this will stimulate the economy. Now under new Keynesian Phillips curve, क्या दिक्कत आ रही है यहाँ पे? The issue that we are facing is that this is forward looking. This is a forward looking this thing. ठीक है. तो अब लोगों को पता है that when output will increase, then it will lead to future inflation. When output will increase means supply will increase. When aggregate supply increases, this is my AD, this is my AS. When AS will increase, it will lead to future inflation in the economy, right? Sorry, not AS, AD. When output in the economy will increase, it will lead to future inflation in the economy. अगर ज़्यादा output है economy में, तो automatically inflation will increase in the economy. People will have more money. Output is also related to more employment, more jobs, more wages, more inflation. है ना? So when output will increase, it will lead to more inflation in the economy. But now people are forward looking. So what they will do is they will increase their expectation about inflation. Right? And if people will increase their expectation about inflation, so E of pi t plus 1 will increase. और अगर ये expectation about inflation बढ़ गया, so basically today itself actual inflation will increase. Because actual inflation is affected by expectation of future inflation. तो जैसे ये बढ़ेगा, this will increase today itself. And if inflation will increase, it will push the interest rate in the economy upwards, nominal interest rate. I upwards. है कि नहीं? So nominal interest rate will start increasing. And ये पूरा का पूरा policy it will fail. Right? So it will create a cycle of policy changes which are suboptimal. So basically, the stabilization problem is bias is related to the time inconsistency problem. It's related to the issue that here we are assuming that people are forward looking. And the moment we assume that people are forward looking, we start having some problems, right? So this is all about the new Keynesian model and the stabilizing policy beta. Okay, thank you.